This will be part 2 of my year-end harvest tour. In part 1, I covered my container-grown fruit trees that produce fruit, and in this video, I'll be covering my planted fruit trees that I harvested fruit off of this past season. This video is running a little bit late. I should have put it out several weeks ago, but it's just a bit too busy and couldn't get to it. And as I stated in my previous video, my backyard orchard is still fairly new, and the majority of the trees are pretty young. Some of these trees have only been in the ground for a year or two, and for some this was their first harvest. Recently I had a viewer comment on wanting a little more information on how I water and fertilize my trees, and he also wanted to know if I had any disease or pest issues. All of these topics are really important, and at some point I'll try to get a video out in order to cover them. But for now, I don't want to spend too much time on those topics. It's going to be a fairly long video as it is, so I'd rather just stick to the harvest, and I will touch a little bit on some of the pest and watering of the trees, but I don't want to get too in-depth. I'll start with these lychee trees, or lychee, however you choose to pronounce it. These are the Emperor variety. I bought them about 3 years ago, and they were planted in the ground just about a couple of years ago. This was their first harvest, and they produced a good amount, especially when you consider the size of these trees. As you can see, they are fairly small, only standing not even 3 feet tall. Despite the size, they did produce a fair amount of fruit. And here's what the fruit looked like. As for the taste on these, I wasn't very impressed with the flavor. They were not bad, but it did have a slight, almost garlic-like aftertaste. It was not strong, but the flavor was not all that great. And as I mentioned, this was their first harvest, so I'm hoping as the tree matures, the taste will improve on these. This one here is my longan. I didn't get a harvest off of this one. It's only been in the ground a short time. So hopefully next season I'll be able to get some fruit off of it. This one here is my Barbados acerola cherry tree. I won't spend too much time talking about this one since I didn't get any harvest this past season. It flowered, but it didn't set any fruit. It's been in the ground less than a year, so it's probably going through a little transplant shock. As is this next one. Which is my Jabuticaba. It's also been in the ground less than a year, and it also flowered but failed to set any fruit. And this is my Lolita Surinam cherry, a black variety. This one has been in the ground a little less than a year. It's produced a fair amount of fruit, but not as many when it was growing in a container. This tree was purchased in 2019, and I kept it in a 15-gallon container for a couple of years before putting it in the ground, and it did extremely well growing in the container. I was able to harvest a really large amount of fruit back then. I'm guessing it's still going through a little bit of transplant shock, but it's doing okay, and it is producing fruit. So hopefully this next season it'll produce an even bigger crop. I also have this other Surinam cherry. This one was advertised as a red variety. I planted it in the ground September of 2018, and this one took several years before it was able to set any fruit. This last season was the first year that I was able to get any fruit off of it. It produced a heavy crop, it didn't produce the heavy crop, but as you can see, it's managed to put on more fruit, and it's got quite a bit of fruit growing in different stages of development. The fruit on this one, it starts off green, and then it changes to an orange color, and then to red, and then finally a dark black color. I found that it's best to harvest them when they're the dark black color and they easily come off the tree. If you pick them a bit early, they have a slight tart taste to them, but it's not bad in flavor. They turn a bit more sweet if you allow them to turn completely black. And this is my third Surinam cherry tree. This one is also a black variety, and it's been in the ground just over a year. It did set a small crop last season after being planted. It put on a good amount of growth since then, and as you can see, it is starting to develop some flower buds, so it should be a pretty good harvest. And this is my burgundy plum tree. I've talked about this one in a few of my previously posted videos. I planted this one about 4.5 years ago, and it's produced a heavy set of blooms for several seasons, but it never managed to set any fruit. I was about ready to give up on this one until this last season. To my surprise, it managed to set a couple of plums. Although it only produced 2 plums, it eased my doubts that it was a self-pollinating variety. This is the only plum tree I have in my yard, and I purchased the burgundy. This is a burgundy plum variety because it's supposed to be self-pollinating. I was beginning to think that it was somehow mislabeled at the nursery, and it was some other variety that required cross-pollination. But since it managed to set its first fruit this past season, it's pretty clear that it is a self-pollinating variety. Hopefully it's just a matter of getting acclimated to my area, and it'll do better as the tree matures. This next group of trees are my figs. These were planted in the ground about 2 years ago. The one in the front is a Peter's honey. This one in the back right is an Excel fig, and the other one on the other side, on the back left, is a blackjack fig. As you can see, these have been pruned and are still dormant. Here's what they look like with their first fruit set. The Peter's honey is the one that produced the largest crop. This variety also happens to be the one that I believe to be the best tasting. I'm not exactly sure how many it produced, but it must have been well over 100. The Excel fig didn't produce very many. The blackjack fig also didn't produce that many. There was also a small crop, about 15 or so. This was their first harvest since being planted, so hopefully I'll get even more off these trees as they mature. And these are my cherry trees. That is a Royal Meanie on the left and a Royal Lee on the right. These require cross-pollination, and from research I've done, they may take up to a few years before they start to produce heavy crops. I've had these in the ground for a couple of years. They have produced some cherries, but only small amounts. This last season was a little more than the previous one, but still only a couple of handfuls between both trees. And the birds got to most of them. But the few that I was able to taste were excellent in flavor. And here's my stone fruit section. In this first group I have 3 peach tree varieties. This next group over here I have 2 nectarine trees and a nectar plum in the front. And in this last section I have an apium in the front, and in the back are 2 apricot trees. I wanted to point out that I have this section on a drip system. Most of my yard is on a drip system. I use this shut-off valve here to control watering. This valve is connected to the same watering zone as this other section of trees that I have growing here. And the majority of these other trees are citrus. The trees that are being watered off this valve are all deciduous trees, so when they are dormant, I shut this valve off. Deciduous trees don't take up as much water when they're dormant, so I can control their water intake by shutting this valve and still keep the other evergreen trees watering. Okay, so back to my stone fruit section. In early December, these trees still had all their leaves, so I went through and stripped them in an attempt to force them into dormancy. I've had to do that for the last couple of seasons because if I leave them alone, the leaves will stay on well past December and into January. At least by stripping them, they'll get a little more chill hours. Anyway, here's what my peach trees looked like when they were fruiting. This 4-on-1 peach tree is the one that produced the most fruit. This one has been in the ground for a couple of years. It produced a really large amount of flower buds, so I had to heavily thin it out. This other one over here is my Babcock Peach White. I also thinned this one down, and I only allowed about 40 to 45 to set. This other one here is my Santa Barbara peach tree. This one produced the least amount of fruit, only about 10 or 15 reached full maturity. The good thing is that since all of these are different varieties, I get a longer harvest period because they don't mature at the same time. The 4-on-1 peach tree is usually the first to harvest. Then a few weeks later, the Babcock White. And then the Santa Barbara is usually the last one to harvest. This next group are my nectarine trees. This one on the left is a Saze King nectarine. And next to it is a Snow Queen nectarine. And in the front I have a Spice Z nectar plum. I didn't get much of a harvest off of the 2 nectarine trees in the back. The Saze King produced about 15 or so, but the majority had split and were not really edible. The few that did manage to reach maturity and that didn't split, those were excellent in flavor. The nectar plum in the front was the one that produced the most. In all, I'd say more than 100 were harvested. The majority were slightly small. I should have done a better job of thinning, but the flavor was really good. I don't think I'll be getting very many this season. I pruned the tree shortly after harvesting the fruit, but as you can see, it didn't produce much growth. This last group here are my apricot trees. These are always the last to bloom. They've only been in the ground for a couple of years, and this one here in the front is a cotton candy apium. It put on quite a bit of growth, but I was only able to get a small amount of fruit to set. Only about 7 or 8 wound up reaching maturity. They were all good size, and they did have excellent flavor. This one over here is a Katy apricot. I didn't get any fruit off of this one. And the last one over on the other side is a Royal Blenheim apricot, which only produced about 5. I don't know what happened with this one. In previous seasons I've had a lot more, but for some reason this season only about 5 reached maturity. And here are my persimmon trees. I won't spend too much time on these. I recently uploaded a video on these. You can search my channel. I'll put the title on the screen. You can get more detailed information on the flower to harvest and taste in that video. But I did manage to harvest about 30 or so off of these trees. And here are my mango trees. I didn't get a harvest off of these this last season, but I thought I would show you how they are doing since they're starting to flower. Hopefully I'll be able to get some of these flower buds to set some fruit. And here in this group I have a patamba in the front and ice cream bean in the back left and grumi chama next to it on the right. These trees were planted a couple of years ago. The patamba has produced a crop this last season, but or rather a couple of seasons ago, but this last season I lost my harvest due to black sooty mold. Here's a video of how bad the mold was. It pretty much covered all the leaves and the fruit, and it just didn't develop. I wound up losing everything. I've since gone through and used some water and soap to clean it up, but I should have been on top of this a lot sooner. Could have probably saved the crop, or at least some of it, but I didn't realize it had gotten this bad. It's the worst I've ever seen it on any of my trees. The grumi chama produced its very first harvest this past season, but it was a really small harvest, only a handful set. This season it appears that it's going to be a much bigger crop, and it's produced quite a bit of flower buds, so I should get a lot more fruit off of this one this season. And my ice cream bean tree, this one produced its very first set of flowers. It was just a really, really small amount of flowers this past season, and out of those only this one ice cream bean fruit set. One thing I'd like to mention, if you've been following my channel, you know I've been practicing high density planting, where basically you're planting 3 trees in the space where traditional planting you only put 1 tree in. Since these trees are planted so close together, they're all from the same family or related to one another. So the watering needs are similar, fertilizing needs are similar. The one thing that I didn't really take into account was the growth rate. And I mentioned that because the growth rate on this ice cream bean tree is extremely fast. I've already had to prune it several times. It keeps trying to overcrowd the grumi chama and also the patamba. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to have any trouble with the grumi chama, because it's moderate grower and it's pretty good size. So as long as I keep the ice cream bean tree pruned, it should do okay. The one that might be an issue is the patamba in the front. That one is listed as a slow growing tree, and I can tell you that it is. In the time it's been in the ground, it really hasn't put on very much growth at all. So I'm going to have to stay on top of the pruning for the ice cream bean to make sure that it doesn't crowd out the patamba and overtake it and block all the sunlight from getting to the patamba. Just something I'll have to keep an eye on. And these are my pink Barbie guavas. There's 2 trees planted in this section. And these have been in the ground for about a couple of years. And the majority of the trees I'm going to be showing you next have also, along this section here, have also only been in the ground for about a couple of years or so. But these guavas are doing really well in this section. They're heavy producers and they put on a really good crop this past season, so they're doing excellent. This one here is my Eureka lemon, and this is the first season. Last season it really didn't produce very many, but this season it's put on a decent amount of fruit. The leaves have a little bit of cold damage, but otherwise it's doing well. And next to it is my Cara orange, which didn't do too well setting fruit this season. It produced a lot of flowers, but only this fruit here managed to set. I think it's probably still going through some transplant shock, but it is putting on quite a bit of growth. And there's a few flower buds that are starting to form, so hopefully this season it'll do much better now that it's had a chance to get a little bit more established root system. And here's my Moro blood orange. I didn't get any fruit set off of this one this last season. I've had quite a bit of trouble with this one with ants and aphids, and also some black mold. As you can see, a lot of the leaves are deformed, mostly from an aphid infestation that I had, but it's also leaf miner. I've gotten a handle on the ants, which should help reduce with the aphids as well. And I also put up that trap that you see there is for a leaf miner. So hopefully this season it'll do a lot better. Maybe I'll be able to actually get some fruit off of this one. And this other one here that's not doing that well is my Satsuma mandarin. This is another one that was heavily attacked by the ants and the aphids. Hard to believe, but when this was growing in a pot, I had it growing in a 15-gallon pot. I wound up harvesting about 100 fruit off of it. And then as soon as I planted it in the ground, that's when it got hit with the ants and all the pests. And I lost a lot of leaves off of it, and the branching died, so I wound up trimming it back. Hoping now that I've taken care of the pest issues, it'll bounce back, but I'm gonna have to keep a close eye on this one because it's not doing all that well. And here I have my grapefruit trees. This one is a Rio Red grapefruit tree. And this is the only fruit that's set on it. This is another group of trees that have been had a lot of pest issues. As you can see, they're bouncing back. This other one here right next to it is a Oro Blanco grapefruit tree, but both of them are putting on quite a bit of new growth. So hopefully, now that I have a handle on the pest issues, these will do a lot better this season. And here, these are my ice cream banana plants. The mother plant on these was planted a little over 2 years ago, and it's put out quite a few pups. And this last season, it produced its first crop. It's a pretty good sized crop. It's excellent flavor on this banana. I have 2 other varieties, and this one here is my favorite. I have a Cavendish and Neon banana, but this one here, the ice cream banana, is my favorite. It's got the best flavor in my opinion. And this one here, it's starting to flower, is my Dorset golden apple tree. I managed to get a pretty good crop off of this one this last season. Got about 30 off of it. They were fairly small, but excellent flavor. And these are my pear trees. That's a hood pear on the right and a pineapple pear on the left. These have been in the ground less than 2 years, and no fruit off of these. And these are my red lady papaya plants. These have also been in the ground less than 2 years, and they've all flowered, but this is the only one that has managed to set any fruit. And this was the first time any of these have set any fruit. They got hit pretty good with the cold damage. They lost quite a bit of leaves on them. The one in the middle got hit the worst. So I may have to cut it back and see if it'll re-sprout. But hopefully they'll survive. Most of the tips on this one here are damaged, and I'll probably have to cut those off. It should survive. Well, I'll keep you posted on this one, see how it does. Well, that will be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching. Hopefully, now that spring is just around the corner and things are starting to liven up, I'll be able to upload videos on a more regular basis and keep you posted on all that's happening in my backyard orchard. So as always, stay safe, grow your own, and thank you for watching.